What would you do if a woman in a cream Burberry trench coat, diamond studs flashing under courtroom lights, stood in front of Judge Frank Caprio and said, "By noon, my lawyers will have your robe in a box"? Drop a comment telling us whether you think money can bully justice, because what happened next stunned an entire courtroom into silence. This was not just another traffic hearing. This was the morning Pride walked into Providence Municipal Court and met something far stronger than power. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the truth always has a way of showing up. Like this video, if you've ever seen someone mistake wealth for immunity. And share this with someone who needs to see what real accountability looks like. It was Tuesday, March 17, 2026, at exactly 9:17 a.m., inside Courtroom 3 at 25 Dorrance Street in Providence, Rhode Island. The room smelled faintly of old wood polish, printer ink, and wet wool from coats shaken dry in the spring drizzle outside. The benches were nearly full because Judge Caprio's courtroom always drew people, some for their own cases, some because they wanted to watch kindness and justice wrestle in real time. A camera light blinked quietly from the side wall, a radiator hissed, papers shuffled, then the back doors swung open and every head turned. Celeste Hale walked in like she was late for a board meeting she owned. She was 41, tall, sharp-featured, and carrying the kind of anger that arrived before she did. Her black St. Laurent tote was tucked under one arm, a Cartier tank watch hugged her wrist, and her red-soled Christian Louboutin heels clicked hard enough on the tile floor to make even the bailiff glance up. Behind her came attorney Vanessa Cole in a Navy theory suit, already whispering, "Say as little as possible." Celeste didn't listen. Women like Celeste had spent years being told rooms would adjust themselves around them. This room did not. The clerk, Nia Patel, called the case in a clear, steady voice. Case number PMCTR 26314-1187, City of Providence versus Celeste Hale. Citations 44,291, 44,293, and 44,295. Obstruction of a wheelchair access curb, failure to obey the direction of a parking enforcement officer, and negligent operation creating pedestrian hazard. A low murmur slid through the gallery. Those charges sounded simple on paper. They were not simple in real life. And before Judge Caprio said a single word, Celeste planted both hands on the defense table and muttered loudly enough for the first two rows to hear, "This entire thing is a joke." If you've ever watched someone walk into consequences with full confidence and absolutely no idea what's coming, stay with us, because this only gets wilder. Drop a comment telling us the exact moment you think she should have stopped talking. Subscribe if you love courtroom stories where arrogance meets reality. Because in less than 10 minutes, one sentence from Judge Caprio was about to change the entire temperature of that room. Judge Caprio looked up over his glasses, calm as still water. He was in his usual dark robe, tie perfectly centered, voice soft enough that people had to lean in. That was part of what made him powerful. He never had to raise his voice. "Good morning, Ms. Hale," he said. "You seem upset." The gallery chuckled under their breath. Celeste didn't smile. She tilted her chin and answered, "I'm insulted. I have been publicly humiliated over a fabricated parking ticket. And if this turns into one of those made-for-camera spectacles, I will be filing suit against the city and against you personally." The room froze. Even the radiator seemed to stop hissing for a second. Bailiff Thomas Reardon straightened near the wall. Attorney Vanessa Cole closed her eyes for half a beat, like a woman hearing a glass crack and already knowing it was expensive. Judge Caprio folded his hands and the silence stretched just long enough to become painful. Then he said, "Ma'am, you may sue me if you wish. But before anyone sues anyone, this court is going to find out what happened." The words landed softly. The effect was thunder. Celeste's laugh was short and sharp. "What happened is your city employees targeted me because I drive a nice car and refuse to be harassed." She said it with a little flick of her fingers, as if city employees were a species she only encountered when something needed carrying. "I was parked for 90 seconds. 90. Meanwhile, people in broken-down trucks block entire lanes and nobody cares. This is selective enforcement, and frankly, it reeks. She turned halfway toward the gallery as if expecting agreement. What she got instead were narrowed eyes and the heavy stillness that comes when people recognize contempt. Judge Caprio glanced at the file. Your vehicle is listed here as a 2024 White Range Rover Autobiography, Rhode Island plate HLE27. Celeste said, yes, he said, and the report says it was parked across a painted blue-striped wheelchair Exia's S-Zone on Washington Street at 7:42 a.m. on February 28, with the engine running, the curb ramp blocked, and a city parking enforcement officer standing at your driver's side window asking you to move. He looked back up. Is any of that inaccurate? Celeste crossed her arms. It lacks context. There it was, not a denial, not regret. Context, the favorite word of people who think facts should bend around them. The first witness was Officer Miguel Santos of the Providence Police Department, 36 years old, 5 years on patrol, pressed uniform, shoulders squared, body cam clipped at chest height on the day of the incident. He stepped to the side monitor while Nia Patel loaded the footage. Santos had the kind of face viewers trust immediately. Tired eyes, honest posture, no appetite for drama. Judge Caprio asked him what happened. Santos said he had responded to a parking enforcement assistance call at 7:44 a.m. outside the corner of Washington Street and Eddy, near the wheelchair ramp used by patients going into the Westminster Adult Rehabilitation Annex. When he arrived, he saw Doris Keller, age 58, city parking enforcement, standing beside the Range Rover with her citation device in hand, visibly shaken. Then the body cam footage started. The screen showed a rain-dark street reflecting brake lights like red smears on black glass. You could hear the soft slap of slush under shoes, the distant whine of a bus braking, and Officer Santos breathing lightly as he approached. Doris Keller stood beside the white SUV in a fluorescent yellow city jacket, her shoulders hunched. Celeste was behind the wheel, window down, sunglasses on despite the gray sky, one hand on the steering wheel, the other holding a phone. Her voice hit the speakers before her face did. Do you know who funds half this city? Do you know how many people I employ? Get that ticket printer away from my car. A woman in the back row whispered, oh no. Another man actually winced. On the screen, Officer Santos stepped in and said, ma'am, I need you to move the vehicle. You're blocking wheelchair access. Celeste didn't even look at the officer at first. She stared at Doris and said, people like you always pick the wrong target. It was one of those sentences that sucked oxygen out of a room. Then she turned to Santos and snapped, I'm not moving until I have that woman's full name, badge number, supervisor, and pension information. Judge Caprio paused the video. He did not look angry. Somehow that was worse. Ms. Hale, he said quietly, did you say those words? Celeste shifted. I was frustrated. He repeated, did you say them? Her attorney leaned in, whispering desperately, but Celeste's pride was a bad listener. Yes, she said, but again, context matters. Judge Caprio nodded once. It does. Let's continue. That was the moment more than one person in the gallery realized she was not digging a hole anymore. She was drilling. Like this video, if you believe one sentence can reveal a person's character faster than an entire resume. And tell us in the comments, when someone says, people like you, in a courtroom, what does that tell you? Because the next 90 seconds of footage changed this from an ugly exchange into something much bigger. The body cam resumed. Doris Keller's voice trembled as she said, ma'am, I'm just asking you to pull up 20 feet. Celeste rolled her eyes and smirked. Then ask someone else. I'm late because incompetent people slow everything down. Santos moved closer. Ma'am, put the phone down and shift the car into park or drive forward. You cannot stay here. Celeste turned the wheel sharply, and for one terrifying second the SUV lurched half a car length. On the speakers, several people shouted at once. Judge Caprio paused again, and now the camera angle showed why. Just ahead of the Range Rover, entering the crosswalk from the sidewalk curb, was Lorraine Velez, 63, a school crossing guard in a reflective poncho, pulling 11-year-old Noah Rivera by the hand. Noah wore a navy raincoat, thick glasses, and a small backpack with a yellow zipper pull shaped like a soccer ball. His right leg brace was visible from the side. The SUV's front bumper didn't strike them, but it surged close enough that Lorraine yanked Noah backwards so hard she spun and fell on her shoulder against the wet curb. Noah stumbled, hit his knee, and began crying. This time the courtroom did gasp. It wasn't one dramatic unified gasp like in movies. It was worse. It was scattered, human, involuntary, a hand over a mouth, a whispered curse, the scrape of someone shifting forward on a bench. Celeste's face for the first time that morning changed, just a little. The confidence didn't vanish, but it cracked. Officer Santos explained that Celeste had then accelerated away before he could finish his instruction, cutting around a parked delivery bike and forcing the cyclist to swerve into a newspaper box. That cyclist was L. I had it, 29, a Syrian-born father of one who delivered breakfast orders for Sunrise couriers while finishing electrician certification classes at night. Eli had suffered a fractured right wrist and a gash above his eyebrow requiring 3 stitches. Santos had included photographs and the incident supplement in the file. Nia Patel handed copies to the bench. The gallery leaned so far forward it looked like the whole room was tipping. Vanessa Cole finally stood. Your Honor, with respect, this is veering into prejudicial territory for what should be a municipal citation hearing. Judge Caprio said, Counselor, when the court is asked to ignore context, the court becomes very interested in context. Another little wave of murmurs moved through the benches. He turned to Celeste. You threatened to sue this court over humiliation. Humiliation is not the issue here. Harm is. At 9:31 a.m., the hearing stopped feeling ordinary. It started feeling inevitable. Doris Keller took the stand next. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't theatrical. She was wearing a city-issued jacket over a faded green sweater, her auburn hair pulled back with a plain black elastic, and one shoelace on her left boot was visibly frayed. But there was something about the way she held herself that made the whole room respect her. She had worked parking enforcement for 12 years after her husband, Raymond Keller, died of a stroke in 2013. She was raising her granddaughter, Leela, because her daughter worked nights at Kent County Hospital. She didn't talk like someone trying to win sympathy. She talked like someone who had no time to waste. Judge Caprio asked her to describe the encounter. Doris swallowed once and said, I approached the vehicle because the blue zone was fully blocked and a wheelchair van was already behind it waiting. I knocked on the driver's window and asked her to pull forward. She said she was on an important call. I told her someone in a chair couldn't get up the curb. She said, then carry them. That line hit the courtroom like cold water. Celeste's attorney's pen stopped moving. Even the stenographer looked up. Doris continued, and now her voice was thinner not because she wanted pity but because memory had teeth. When Officer Santos arrived, I stepped back because she started recording me on her phone and saying she'd have me fired before lunch. I've been yelled at before. That's part of the job. But when the car jumped forward, I saw Ms. Velez pull that little boy back, and I thought if he had fallen the other way, she stopped there. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Judge Caprio asked if she had any injuries. Doris shook her head. No physical injuries, Your Honor, just didn't sleep much after. Then, almost embarrassed, she added, I kept hearing tires. That was the first moment the mood in the room shifted from outrage to something heavier. Human. Real. Because a bruise on a shoulder heals. Hearing tires in your head at 2:00 a.m. is different. Celeste finally spoke again. This is absurd. We're doing trauma theater over a minor misunderstanding. Nobody was hit by my vehicle. Her voice had gone flatter now, like she was trying to regain control through precision. And if city employees were properly directing traffic instead of escalating me, none of this happens. Judge Caprio looked at her for a long second and said, Ma'am, accountability sounds like persecution to people who have never had to answer to anyone. Somebody in the gallery whispered, Wow, another person actually wrote it down. Hit subscribe if that line deserves to live rent-free on the internet. And drop a comment if you think the courtroom already knew where this was going. But wait, because just when it looked like the body cam had done enough damage, Judge Caprio asked for the city surveillance feed. That was when things got worse for Celeste. Much worse. The city surveillance footage came from a fixed camera mounted on the corner pole above Washington Street. There was no dramatic audio, just a grainy high-angle view of wet pavement, umbrellas, and moving traffic. Sometimes silent video is louder than shouting. Nia Patel zoomed in as best she could. There was the Range Rover sitting diagonally across the access stripes. There was Doris approaching. There was Officer Santos from the far end of the frame. And then there was something the body cam had not clearly captured. Seconds before the SUV lurched, a silver wheelchair transport van had pulled up behind it. The side door of the van slid open. Inside sat a middle-aged man in a chair, covered to the chest with a navy blanket. He waited while his driver stood in the rain looking helplessly at the blocked curb ramp. You could actually see the driver gesture, palms up, toward Celeste's car. The courtroom made that sound people make when they already know the answer but still wish it weren't true. It wasn't just that Celeste had inconvenienced someone. It was that she had seen and exactly who she was affecting and refused to move anyway. Then came the other detail. At the far right edge of the frame, Eli Haddad's delivery bike entered from the bike lane. He braked when the Range Rover suddenly surged out. His back wheel fishtailed. He clipped the corner of a metal newspaper box and went down hard, sliding on his right side across the rain-slick paint of the crosswalk. No one could argue context anymore. Context was on the wall for everyone to see. Celeste's face had lost color now, not much, just enough that the contour around her cheekbones looked sharper. Vanessa Cole leaned over and whispered, "Stop talking." Celeste whispered back, "That angle makes it look worse." Judge Caprio heard her. "The angle doesn't make it worse, Ms. Hale. The angle makes it visible." That line spread through the courtroom like a spark. Eli Haddad walked in wearing a charcoal zip-up hoodie under a borrowed blazer that hung a little loose on his thin frame. His right wrist was in a black brace. Above his left eyebrow, barely hidden by makeup, was the healing line of the cut from that morning. He spoke softly, with the careful pace of a man who had taught himself to be precise in a language he'd fought hard to master. He explained he had come to Rhode Island in 2018, that his wife had died in Aleppo 2 years earlier, and that he was raising his 6-year-old daughter, Miriam, with help from his sister in Cranston. He worked mornings on deliveries and studied nights because he wanted work with wires, not wheels. When Judge Caprio asked what he remembered, Eli said, "I remember hearing a woman yelling before I saw the car move. Then I looked up and the front of the SUV came across the lane. I swerved because I thought she did not see me. When I fell, I heard the child crying. That is what I remember the most, the child crying." He swallowed. "My wrist hurt, my head hurt, but the child crying sounded like my daughter when she had fever." The room was utterly still. Vanessa Cole tried cross-examination. "Mr. Haddad, to be clear, the vehicle did not strike your bicycle directly." Eli nodded. "Yes, I said that. I swerved because I did not want it to strike me." Vanessa asked, "So your fall was your decision?" You could feel the courtroom recoil. Eli looked at her, not angry, just tired. "Avoiding danger is not a decision, ma'am. It is a reaction." Judge Caprio wrote something down without expression. Vanessa sat. Then Nia Patel handed the bench a packet labeled Exhibit F. It was the emergency department summary from Rhode Island Hospital. Wrist fracture, eyebrow laceration, abrasion to right hip, discharged with work restriction and brace. Attached was a wage loss statement from Sunrise Couriers showing Eli had missed 9 delivery shifts and 2 weeks of class lab sessions because he could not safely use his dominant hand. That was revelation number 1. The negligent moment had consequences long after the crosswalk cleared. Consequences that did not vanish just because the woman behind the wheel had a lawyer. The second revelation arrived in a small white envelope. It had been dropped off that morning at the clerk's window by Tasha Green, a nurse practitioner from the rehabilitation annex who had seen the entire incident from the front steps. Her written statement described the blocked wheelchair ramp and the delayed unloading of a patient named Henry Wallace, a 54-year-old stroke survivor being transported to physical therapy. Because the ramp was blocked and the van had to reposition in traffic, Henry's transfer was delayed by 6 minutes in cold rain. To healthy people, 6 minutes is nothing. To a man with post-stroke spasticity and anxiety around transfers, 6 minutes sitting tilted in a van while rain beats the door and strangers argue in front of him feels like forever. Tasha wrote that Henry had become so distressed, he began shaking and crying, and his blood pressure had spiked enough that therapy had to be postponed. Judge Caprio read the key lines aloud. The gallery turned, almost as one, back towards Celeste. A moment earlier, she had been the center of attention. Now she was the center of a widening circle of harm. That's when Judge Caprio said the sentence that changed everything. This court began the morning with a parking file. It appears we are now looking at a pattern of disregard. If you're still here, tell us in the comments whether this stopped being about a ticket the moment that silent footage rolled. Like this video if you believe invisible harm matters just as much as visible injury. Because what Celeste did next should have been impossible after everything the room had just seen. And yet she did it anyway. She doubled down. I reject the implication that I am responsible for every emotional response in a 2-block radius, Celeste said, each word clipped and polished. This is exactly the kind of distorted narrative that gets built when a successful woman is convenient. To hate, I did not touch that cyclist. I did not touch that child. And if a transport service cannot adapt to urban traffic, that is hardly my fault. She had said many cruel things that morning. That may have been the worst because it was so clean. Cruelty without heat. Cruelty that had practiced. The courtroom reacted instantly. Someone said, "Unbelievable," louder than a whisper. Bailiff Reardon turned his head toward the benches and silence returned, but it was boiling silence now. Judge Caprio didn't react to the crowd. He reacted to the words. "Ms. Hale," he said, "the law does not require impact to recognize endangerment, and morality does not require blood to recognize harm." There was another one, another quote people would repeat by dinner. Then came the choice moment. Judge Caprio looked down at the file, then back up. "You may continue arguing that everyone else caused this, or you may start telling the truth. Those are your options this morning." Celeste opened her mouth fast, too fast. "The truth is I was in an emergency." Vanessa Cole tried to stop her, too late. "I had a family medical situation," Celeste said. "My mother has dementia. I was trying to reach her facility because she had wandered the night before. I was upset. Yes, I spoke harshly. But I was not some cartoon villain blocking disabled people for fun." For the first time, the gallery hesitated. A few faces softened. Dementia changes rooms. Dementia explains shaken nerves. Dementia complicates anger. You could feel the empathy trying to enter. And for one brief minute, it looked like Celeste might finally have found the truth she should have started with. Judge Caprio asked gently, "Was your mother in immediate danger at 7:42 a.m.?" Celeste nodded. "Yes," he asked. "Do you have documentation?" Vanessa Cole said. "We can provide that if necessary." Judge Caprio turned to Nia Patel. "Do we have the subpoena returned from North Bay Mobile?" Nia lifted another folder. Vanessa's expression changed first. She had not known. Because while Celeste had been preparing for theatrics, the city had quietly prepared for facts. Cell site records showed that from 7:31 to 7:48 a.m., Celeste's phone had placed 3 calls to Preston Hale, 1 call to her assistant Gavin Pierce, and 1 4-minute call to a number registered to Arden Strategic PR, the crisis firm retained by her husband's development company. There were no calls to her mother's facility during that window. There had been 1 call at 6:12 a.m. to Harbor Memory residents. It lasted 32 seconds and ended with a voicemail. After that, nothing. Judge Caprio did not pounce. He never pounced. That was part of the terror. He simply said, "Ma'am, these records do not show what you just told this court." Celeste stared at the papers in Nia's hand as if staring hard enough could erase ink. Vanessa Cole whispered, "Do not answer." Judge Caprio said, "Counselor, your client has already answered." That was the cliff, that was the edge, and now everyone in the room knew the fall was coming. Officer Santos was recalled briefly to address something unusual in his supplemental report. After the incident, while emergency responders were checking Eli and Lorraine, Celeste had pulled over around the corner on Dorrance and called someone from inside her vehicle. Santos had approached on foot and heard part of the conversation through the open window. He reported hearing the phrases, "Get this buried," "City cameras are useless," and "I want that woman in yellow unemployed by today." Celeste denied this immediately, but Santos calmly added that the statement had been corroborated by a bystander who later identified herself as Tasha Green. The room turned colder. Judge Caprio asked if there was anything further from the city. Assistant City Solicitor Mark DeLuca, who until now had looked like a man expecting a routine citation calendar, stood and said there was one more witness. Gavin Pierce, age 33, executive assistant to Celeste Hale, present under subpoena. When Gavin entered, people in the gallery actually craned to see him. He looked like a man who hadn't slept and knew it showed. Slim gray suit, crooked tie. Phone clenched so hard in one hand his knuckles had gone white. He took the oath with the flat voice of someone already regretting every loyalty decision he had made for the past 5 years. DeLuca asked where Gavin had been on the morning of February 28. Gavin said he had been in Celeste's passenger seat until 7:39 a.m., when she ordered him out to deal with the dress bag in the back before she moved the car. He explained they had just picked up a garment from Maison Riviere on Westminster because Celeste was on her way to a breakfast strategy meeting at the Pendry regarding a fundraising gala. Not a hospital, not a memory care emergency. A gala. A breakfast, a dress bag. The courtroom didn't gasp this time. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of silence that feels arrest on behalf of the liar. Gavin kept going. Once he had started, it all came out. He said Celeste had been under extreme personal pressure because her husband's company, Hale Mercer Development, was facing a federal document request tied to a zoning dispute in East Providence. She was afraid donors would distance themselves, afraid photos would spread, afraid looking weak in public would feed the story that the Hales were losing control. She said, Gavin testified, voice shaking, "If I let 1 meter maid push me around on camera, every vulture in this city will smell blood." A woman near the aisle whispered, "There it is." Vanessa Cole objected to hearsay, sustained, but the damage was already done because the sentence sounded too true to ignore. Then DeLuca introduced an email chain retrieved from Gavin's work account, sent at 8:03 a.m., 20 minutes after the incident, from Celeste to Gavin with the subject line, "Now." The body read, "Find out if the old man is filming calendar this week. If that clip lands online, we go nuclear. Draft 8 a discrimination angle, make it ugly." There was no hospital, no missing mother, no panic, just strategy. Judge Caprio read the email once and set it down very carefully. "Ms. Hale," he said, "you threatened this court before the hearing even began. It appears you were planning the threat before the hearing existed." Celeste's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her attorney looked devastated, not because the case was lost, but because truth had arrived wearing timestamps. This was the moment millions would watch if the clip ever surfaced. Everyone in the room knew it. The rich woman who had walked in swinging suddenly looked like someone standing in a storm wearing paper jewelry. Yet this story was still not done, because the next witness didn't deepen the legal problem. She deepened the moral one. Lorraine Velez moved slowly to the stand, her left arm still stiff inside a beige sling beneath her neon crossing guard poncho. She had worked school crossings for 11 years after retiring from cafeteria management. Her late son, Daniel, had died in a motorcycle crash at 27. Since then, she said, "I watch every child like I borrowed them from God." It was the sort of sentence that no screenwriter invents lightly, because it only sounds real when spoken by someone who has lost something permanent. Judge Caprio asked what she remembered. Lorraine smiled at Noah Rivera's mother in the second row before answering. I remember rain in my eyes. I remember Noah asking if I thought Manchester United would ever win again, and I told him only if they prayed. Then I heard shouting and I looked up and that big white truck jumped. She pointed just once, not dramatically, toward Celeste. I pulled him back and I landed on my shoulder. I'm fine. I'm old. Shoulders complain. But he wasn't sleeping right after. He started asking if cars can climb sidewalks. Noah's mother, Daniela Rivera, covered her mouth and began crying quietly. Noah himself wasn't there. He had returned to school the week before, but he still refused to step into a crosswalk unless an adult held both of his hands. Lorraine said that sentence, and several people in the gallery looked away at once, because a scared child changes the texture of wrongdoing. It doesn't stay administrative. It becomes intimate. Judge Caprio asked whether Lorraine wanted the maximum penalty. This was the choice or consequence moment everyone had been waiting for. This was where anger usually hardens. Lorraine took a breath and said, I want her to understand the size of the machine she was sitting in. I want her to understand what it feels like when somebody richer, faster, louder decides you don't matter. Then she looked directly at Celeste for the first time. And I want her to know Noah keeps asking if the lady in the white truck was mad at him. That did it. Celeste inhaled sharply, and the sound was audible through the microphones. Not because she was ready to confess. Not yet. But because the cruelty had finally acquired a child's face. Like this video if that sentence hit you in the chest. And tell us below, if you were in that courtroom, would you want punishment or understanding first? Because Judge Caprio was about to ask a question no one saw coming, and it would split this story wide open. He looked at Celeste and asked, What was your father's name? The room blinked. Vanessa Cole frowned. Mark DeLuca lowered his pen. Celeste looked almost annoyed by the irrelevance of it. Excuse me, Judge Caprio repeated. Your father, Mr. Hale, is your married name. What was your father's name? Celeste's voice thinned. Salvador Morno. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, eyes sharpening with memory. Sal Morno, City Bus Garage, Silver Lake Section. He leaned back. I knew your father. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly. The room had turned into attention. Judge Caprio spoke with that quiet old neighborhood certain. Why, that cannot be faked. Your father came through this courthouse years ago over a registration issue. Hardworking man, grease under his fingernails. He told me his daughter was the smartest kid on the block and one day nobody would ever look down on her again. He paused. Was that you? Celeste's jaw trembled once before she steadied it. Yes, Judge Caprio said. Then I think the saddest part of this morning is not that you were looked down on. It's that you decided the only safe place in life was above everybody else. You could hear people exhale all at once. The line broke something invisible. Celeste sat down hard, not elegantly, not in control, just down. Her eyes moved to the table, then to the screen, then to Doris, then away. The range of emotions crossing her face was ugly and human and overdue. Shame, defiance, memory, panic. It was all there, colliding. A woman who had spent years building an image was suddenly standing inside the wreckage of it. Judge Caprio asked for a 5-minute recess. Court officers opened the side door. People rose in clumps, buzzing in whispers that sounded like static. Did you hear that? He knew her father. That quote, somebody write that down. One man in a Bruins cap said, this is gonna be everywhere. Another replied, it should be. At the defense table, Vanessa Cole kept her voice low and fierce. You lied to me. You lied to the court. If there is anything else, I need it now. Celeste stared ahead and said, I didn't lie about everything. Vanessa said, that is not the defense you think it is. In the hallway outside Courtroom 3, the fluorescent lights hummed over beige cinder block walls. Celeste stood near a cork bulletin board listing fines and filing procedures, and for the first time that morning she looked small. Not poor, not powerless, small. Gavin Pierce lingered near the water fountain, unable to meet her eyes. Doris sat on a bench rubbing her hands together. Lorraine spoke softly with Daniela Rivera. Eli stared at the floor and rotated his injured wrist carefully. No one grandstanded. No one celebrated. That's what made it heavier. Real harm doesn't need confetti. Then came the twist no one expected. A woman with Celeste's face, only softer and less defended, appeared at the far end of the hallway. Dark wool coat, flat shoes, wet hair tucked behind both ears. She carried a folded paper in one hand and introduced herself to the bailiff as Anna Morno, Celeste's older sister. She had driven in from Warwick after a friend texted her that Celeste was going viral in the worst way and recognized the case from online court listings. Anna said she needed to speak to the judge only if appropriate. Judge Caprio, informed quietly during recess, agreed to accept a letter as an offer of mitigation, not testimony, unless both sides stipulated. Vanessa Cole, desperate for anything humanizing, agreed. When the hearing resumed, Anna did not take the stand. She simply handed the letter to the clerk. It was written 3 months earlier by Celeste's mother, Elena Morno, during one of the last lucid mornings before her dementia worsened. The letter had been found folded in a cookbook after Elena moved into Harbor Memory residence. It was addressed to both daughters. Anna had kept it because Celeste never had time to read family things anymore. That sentence alone told half a life story. Judge Caprio asked permission to read part of it. Vanessa said yes. Celeste did not speak. The letter was written in shaky cursive, on lined paper torn from a legal pad. To my girls, Anna who stays and Celeste who runs fast, I know why you run. You think if you stop, people will remember where we came from and use it against you. Listen to me. Poor is not shame, cruel is shame, tired is not shame, forgetting people is shame. If success ever makes you speak to another working person like their name is dirt, then success has become a sickness. Your father never feared being small. He feared becoming mean. By the second line, the courtroom had fallen into a silence so total you could hear someone crying near the back. By the fourth line, that someone was Celeste. No dramatic sob, no movie collapse, just tears she clearly hated, sliding down a face that had been built for control. She reached for a tissue and missed. Vanessa handed her one without looking at her. Anna stood in the back with both hands around the strap of her purse, crying too, but not with triumph. More like grief. Grief that sometimes the only thing worse than being humiliated is needing to be humiliated before you finally hear what love has been trying to tell you. Judge Caprio set the letter down. "Ms. Hale," he said, and his voice was different now, gentler but somehow harder to escape. "Your mother gave you the answer before you ever got the question." Celeste nodded once, a tiny, broken movement. Then she whispered, "I know." It was the first honest thing she had said all morning. What followed was not immediate redemption. Real change almost never begins nobly. It begins with collapse. Judge Caprio asked the simplest question of the day. "Why were you really angry?" Celeste's shoulders started to shake. She pressed both palms flat to the table like she needed physical proof of gravity. "Because everything was falling apart," she said. "Because my husband was already talking to crisis people before he was talking to me. Because everyone in our world acts like weakness is contagious. Because if I'm not perfect, I become the joke. Because I saw that woman with the ticket machine and—" She stopped, swallowed, then forced it out. "And I wanted somebody smaller than me to feel the panic I was feeling." No one in the room moved. That admission didn't excuse anything. It did something harder. It translated it. Suddenly, cruelty had anatomy. Celeste kept speaking, now with that stunned, ugly momentum confession sometimes has once the dam breaks. "I grew up watching my father get talked down to by men who didn't know how much he knew. I swore nobody would ever look at me that way. Then I married into money, and after a while I couldn't tell the difference between respect and fear. I started needing both. And when things got bad, I used the only thing I knew how to use." She looked at Doris. "Volume, threats, class, all of it." Then she looked at Eli. "I saw you fall." Her voice cracked. "I told myself I didn't." That sentence bent the room. Judge Caprio let it sit. Then he asked, "Do you want mercy?" Celeste gave a bitter, almost disbelieving laugh through tears. "I don't think I deserve mercy." Judge Caprio said, "That wasn't my question." She took a long breath and whispered, "Yes." he nodded. Then understand something important. Mercy without truth is just escape. That became quote number 5, and maybe the strongest one of all. But the story still had one more turn, because just when the room thought it had reached the deepest point, Eli Haddad raised his hand slightly from the witness bench and asked if he could say something. Judge Caprio permitted it. Eli stood carefully, wrist brace visible against the polished wood rail, and faced Celeste. "I know what panic feels like," he said. "When bombs fell near our street, some people with power acted like the rest of us were ants. After I came here, I promised myself I would never become hard because hard things happen to me. I fail sometimes. We all fail, but if you are asking whether I want you destroyed—" He looked down, then back up. "No, destruction taught me nothing good. I want you rebuilt correctly." The gallery went silent in a new way now, not shocked, moved. Then Lorraine Velez spoke from her seat without even standing. "Same," she shrugged with her good shoulder. "Punishment matters, but if she leaves here only embarrassed, then Noah still learns the wrong lesson. He needs to see grown-ups can become different." Doris nodded slowly. "Even Doris, even after the threats, even after the sleepless nights and the pension insult and the people like you." She wiped under one eye and said, "I don't need her ruined, I need her to stop." That was the forgiveness twist. Not sentimental, not cheap. Hard-earned mercy from people who had every right to deny it. Like this video, if you believe the strongest people in a room are often the ones who choose not to retaliate. And tell us honestly in the comments, could you have been that generous after being treated like that? Because Judge Caprio was now holding something more difficult than punishment. He was holding the chance to turn a public humiliation into a public transformation. He asked Anna Morno one question from the back. "Would your sister have support if the court ordered corrective service instead of simply writing a fine?" Anna answered without hesitation. "Yes, if she finally stops pretending she doesn't need family." That landed too. Judge Caprio then did something no one expected. He removed his glasses, set them down, and spoke directly to Celeste as if the cameras had disappeared. "Ms. Hale, the easiest thing in the world for me to do right now would be to make an example of you. The internet loves that. Crowds love that. Sometimes judges love that too if they're not careful. But justice is not humiliation wearing a robe. Justice is truth followed by responsibility." He leaned forward. "So here is what is going to happen." You could feel bodies tighten on the benches. "For the municipal charges before me, I find the evidence overwhelming. The citations are sustained. Maximum statutory fines are imposed." Celeste nodded faintly like she expected as much. Then he continued. "However, I am staying collection for 60 days under strict conditions." Heads lifted. Pens moved. Cameras seemed to glow brighter. "First, full restitution to Mr. Haddad for medical bills, wage loss, and educational interruption, to be documented within 14 days. Second, direct written apologies, not drafted by counsel, to Ms. Kell, Ms. Velez, Mr. Wallace, and the Rivera family, to be submitted to this court and delivered if the recipients choose to accept them." He paused. Nobody dared interrupt. Third, 200 hours of supervised service, to be completed over 4 months, with 40 hours assigned specifically to mobility access assistance and patient transport support at the Westminster Adult Rehabilitation Annex, 40 hours with Providence Safe Streets School Crossing Initiative, and the remainder with a city worker support program assisting municipal employees subjected to public abuse. Now the gasps returned. Fourth, a contribution of $50,000, not as a check written from inconvenience, but through the establishment of a crosswalk and accessibility safety fund in the names of those endangered on February 28, administered through the city, subject to audit. Celeste looked up sharply. Vanessa Cole looked stunned. The gallery went dead quiet. Judge Caprio wasn't finished. "Fifth," he said, "Ms. Hale will return to this courtroom in 90 days for review, and when she returns, she may tell this court whether her money protected her, or whether responsibility finally did something money never could." Then he added the line that would be quoted in comments, stitched in reaction videos, and repeated by people who never even watched the full hearing. The law is not impressed by your handbag, ma'am, but it is deeply interested in your choices. A man in the last row actually whispered, "Lord." Someone else nodded like they had just seen something sacred. Vanessa Cole rose carefully. "Your Honor, $50,000 exceeds the ordinary scale of—" Judge Caprio lifted a hand. "Counselor, your client threatened federal litigation before the first witness. She weaponized wealth in a case where wealth created part of the danger. If she prefers immediate collection and referral for additional review based on today's false statements, we can go there next." Vanessa sat down. Fast. Celeste's face was wet, pale, and utterly unlike the woman who had walked in. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice shook. "All of it." Judge Caprio said, "You'll do more than say it. You'll live it." Then he looked toward the gallery and added, not for spectacle but for clarity, "Let this be understood. Accountability is not revenge. It is the first doorway back to being human." That should have been the climax. For most stories, it would have been. But this one still had an unexpected twist waiting around the corner, and it came not from the bench, but from the parking lot outside the courthouse. As court adjourned for the noon recess, a small cluster formed on the courthouse steps beneath a cold drizzle. News had not yet arrived, but whispers were already spreading. Court regulars, a legal intern, 2 city workers, a man from maintenance who had watched half the hearing on the hall monitor. Celeste emerged with Vanessa, Anna, and Gavin. She looked wrecked, mascara faintly smudged, shoulders no longer squared for combat. She was halfway to the curb when a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up and stopped. Preston Hale stepped out. 50, tailored camel coat, silver hair styled to look casual in the expensive way only very expensive men can manage. He did not approach like a husband rushing to comfort. He approached like a man arriving to contain damage. "We need to leave," he said. "No hug. No 'are you okay?' Just damage control and loafers." Celeste looked at him and something old inside her seemed to finish dying. "Did you send the PR people that morning before you called me back?" she asked. Preston glanced toward Vanessa. "This is not the place." Celeste repeated it louder. "Did you?" he answered with silence, and silence is sometimes confession wearing a better suit. Anna took one step closer to her sister. Gavin looked down. Doris, Eli, and Lorraine were farther back on the steps, waiting for rides, but they heard enough to understand. Everyone understood. Preston lowered his voice. "Listen to me. We can appeal. We can bury the service angle. The fund is performative. We'll have accounting handle it. What matters is optics over the next week." It was such a naked sentence, such a perfectly awful sentence. Celeste closed her eyes. All morning she had been stripped by truth. Now the final layer came off. The marriage, the money, the machine. The whole system she'd used to inflate herself was standing there in broad daylight, showing its wiring. She laughed, not happily, not wildly, just with the exhausted disbelief of someone finally hearing the poison in a voice she once mistook for safety. "Optics," she repeated. "I almost scared a child into the street and you're still talking about optics." Preston's jaw tightened. "Get in the car." Celeste looked back at the courthouse doors, then at her sister, then at Eli's wrist brace, Doris's worn boots, Lorraine's sling, and the rain darkening the stone under everyone's feet. "No," she said. "One Scylla. Blee small final." That was the unexpected twist around the 7,000-word mark. Not a secret camera, not a hidden witness. A decision. The first real decision of her day. Preston stepped closer, anger now visible under the polished exterior. "Do not do this in public." Celeste met his eyes. "Everything bad I've done, I learned in private." The sentence hit like a slap. Gavin actually looked up. Anna put a hand over her mouth. Preston's face went hard. "You're being emotional." Celeste answered, "No, I'm being honest. I forgot the difference." She handed Vanessa her phone. "Please withdraw every draft threat related to this court. Everyone." Vanessa nodded once. "I already planned to." Then, in front of everyone, Celeste turned away from the Mercedes and walked back up the wet courthouse steps toward Doris Keller. What happened next was not neat. That's why it mattered. Celeste stopped 2 feet away and tried to speak. No words came. Doris waited. Eli and Lorraine watched. Anna stood off to the side crying again, but quietly. Finally, Celeste said, "When I talked to you, I was trying to become bigger than my fear by making you smaller. I am ashamed of it." Doris didn't rescue her, didn't say it's okay. She let the apology stand on its own weight. Then Celeste turned to Eli. "I saw you fall. I'm sorry I turned away from that in my mind because it was inconvenient." Eli nodded once, then to Lorraine. "I am sorry Noah thinks my anger was about him." Lorraine's eyes filled. "Then tell him yourself someday," she said, "when you've done the work." That was the key, not words, work. Share this with someone who still thinks apologies are supposed to feel comfortable. And hit subscribe if you've ever seen a person wake up to themselves one brutal inch at a time. Because the next 90 days would prove whether this was courtroom theater or the beginning of actual change. 93 days later, on June 18, 2026, Courtroom 3 was full again. Word had spread. Some came because they wanted to see if the rich woman had disappeared into the usual fog of privilege. Some came because they wanted a sequel. Some came because they had seen the clip online after a local legal channel posted a recap titled "Judge Caprio and the Lawsuit Threat." It had racked up millions of views across platforms, and most comments fell into one of two camps. Throw the book at her, and maybe this is what justice should look like more often. That alone made it one of the most talked about courtroom moments of the spring. At 10:02 a.m., Celeste walked back in. No Burberry trench, no Louboutins, no St. Laurent tote. She wore a simple charcoal blouse, black slacks, flat shoes, and no visible jewelry except a thin silver wedding band that looked like it might not last much longer on her hand. Her hair was pulled back. She carried a plain accordion folder bulging with receipts, service logs, letters, and one spiral notebook. Anna sat behind her. Gavin was there too, but only as moral support now. Vanessa Cole accompanied her, though she seemed more advisor than shield. Nia Patel called the review calendar. Judge Caprio looked down from the bench and said, "Ms. Hale, how are you today?" Celeste answered, "Accountable, Your Honor." A few people in the gallery exchanged looks, not because the line was perfect but because it sounded earned. The first surprise was documentary. Restitution had been paid in full within 9 days of the original hearing. Eli Hadid's medical bills were cleared. His missed course lab fees had been reimbursed, and the safety fund had been established at $50,000 exactly, with an independent city trustee board and a public monthly ledger. More surprising still, Celeste had sold her white Range Rover at a loss and moved the entire proceeds, not just what the court required, into the fund, pushing the total to $86,400. The paperwork was right there in the file. The second surprise was labor. Supervisor reports from the Westminster Adult Rehabilitation Annex showed Celeste had not merely appeared for photo op shifts. She had completed 62 documented hours assisting patient arrivals, wheelchair transfers, hallway escorts, supply restocking, and waiting room family support. Tasha Green, the nurse practitioner whose statement had first widened the case, submitted a letter. Judge Caprio read part of it aloud. Ms. Hale arrived on her first day visibly uncomfortable and overly formal. By the third shift, she was wiping down transport handles, holding elevator doors, and asking stroke patients what music they wanted during therapy intake. On May 22, when a man named Henry Wallace had a panic episode in the Van Bay due to thunder, she was the person who stayed with him until his breathing slowed. That was the same Henry Wallace whose transfer delay she had once treated like a footnote. A murmur ran through the room. Providence Safe Street submitted its own report. Celeste had completed 48 hours shadowing crossing teams at 3 intersections, including one near Vartan Gregorian School. She had stood in drizzle and heat. She had worn the neon vest. She had helped parents with strollers. She had taken notes on curb visibility and timing of pedestrian signals. One report from site coordinator Evelyn Park included the line, "On her second week, she requested to be placed at the busiest corner rather than the easiest one." Another line said, "She asks children now before stepping into a crosswalk. Are you comfortable? Do you want my hand or do you want space?" The courtroom got very quiet at that. Then came the third surprise. Doris Keller had written a letter too. Doris was in court that day, but she chose to let the letter speak first. Judge Caprio read, "The first week I saw Ms. Hale in the City Worker Support Office, I assumed she was there to perform remorse. By the fourth week, she was organizing coffee, listening to meter staff talk about abuse from strangers, and asking for scripts to de-escalate conflict. One afternoon, a driver called me a parasite." Ms. Hale stepped forward, then caught herself, took a breath, and said exactly what the training says. "Sir, I can help you solve the problem, but I cannot help you while you insult people." He actually backed off. I noticed then she had finally learned the difference between control and authority. That line hit almost as hard as Judge Caprio's. When asked if she wished to add anything aloud, Doris stood and said, "She also apologized to my granddaughter Leela for the pension comment, because Leela heard about it online and asked if Grandma's retirement was in danger. I didn't ask her to do that. She just did." Then Doris looked at Celeste and added, "I believe her now." The words were simple. The effect was huge. Judge Caprio turned to Eli Haddad. "Mr. Haddad." Eli smiled in that modest, slightly shy way people do when they're not used to being the center of a room. "I got an A in the lab I had to make up," he said, and the gallery laughed softly. Then he added, "She paid without bargaining. She also came to one of my daughter's school art nights because she had promised Miriam she would see the drawing of a bicycle with wings." That image alone nearly broke the room. "Miriam likes her," Eli said. "Children are either terrible judges of character or the best ones. I think the second." Then came Noah Rivera. He wasn't scheduled to speak. In fact, Daniela Rivera had originally said he would just watch from the back for a few minutes if it felt okay. But halfway through the review, Noah raised his hand the way school had taught him. He had grown a little since March. He still wore his right leg brace. He still clutched things tightly when nervous. But when Judge Caprio asked if he wanted to say something, Noah stood beside his mother and said into the microphone, "Miss Celeste came to our crossing with the orange vest, and she didn't honk even when a guy behind her honked. She just waited. And she said angry grown-ups can practice being safe too." Then he added, in the serious tone only children can deliver without irony, "I don't think she's a truck lady anymore." People laughed through tears. Even Bailiff Reardon smiled. Celeste covered her face for a second and cried openly. Like this video, if you believe no verdict is more powerful than a child saying they feel safe again. And tell us in the comments which update moved you the most. Because now came the final piece of the story, and it was the piece that proved whether her transformation had roots. Judge Caprio asked if she had brought the required written apologies. Celeste said yes, but then added, "There is one more letter if the court will allow it." She handed an envelope to Nia Patel. It was addressed not to the victims, not to the city, not even to the court. It was addressed to Alina Morno, Harbor Memory Residence, Pawtucket. Judge Caprio looked at her. "Would you like to explain?" Celeste took a breath. "My mother doesn't always know who I am now. Some days she thinks I'm her cousin. Some days she knows I'm her daughter for 6 minutes and then loses me again. I started writing to her after that hearing because I realized I had spent years performing success instead of becoming decent. The staff reads the letters to her when she's calm." Her voice shook. "I wanted the court to know I'm trying to become someone she would recognize even on a bad day." She asked permission to read a short portion. Granted. "Mom, today I helped a man into therapy and tied the blanket tighter around his knees because it was windy. You used to do that with Dad when he fell asleep in the chair after double shifts. I think I spent years trying not to be from us. Now I think being from us was the best part of me. I'm sorry I traded tenderness for status and called it strength." There was not a dry eye left in Courtroom 3. Judge Caprio waited a full 10 seconds before speaking. "Ms. Hale," he said, "the court does not need perfection from you. The court needs continuation. "Do you understand?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "Then here is my ruling." The stayed fines were formally converted to civil penalties, satisfied by full compliance and overcompliance. No further punitive enhancement would be sought on the municipal charges, but the court ordered a continuing 6-month volunteer commitment of at least 8 hours per month with Providence Safe Streets or the Rehabilitation Annex to be self-reported and randomly verified. The Accessibility Safety Fund would remain active, and its first expenditure had already been approved. Improved reflective curb markings and weather-resistant signage at the Washington and Eddy access ramp where the incident occurred. In the names of Eli Haddad, Lorraine Velez, Henry Wallace,